Good morning, this is Sarah Parker, and I'm going to be walking through my final project for CPSC5010. This project asked us to create an information management system for a bookstore. So it's a software program that a bookstore might use to keep track of all of their books. Essentially, you can add a book, you can remove a book, you can see what's in stock, what's the lowest price. There's a lot of things that you could add on to this software, but it does meet the requirements for this program. So I'm going to walk through it briefly, but show you more of the execution of how the software actually works. So one of the first things we were asked to do is create a abstract class, and so that is what this entity class is right here. This is kind of, if you'll think of it as like the top class. So there's a couple classes that are derived from it. And we were also asked to create a purely virtual function. And so that is this function right here in our abstract class. This means that any class that inherits from entity will need to implement this display function right here. So we also have a destructor as well, but these are the two important things. It's an abstract class and it's a virtual function. So the first file I want to walk you through is the book, because I feel like that's one of the more important ones, because that is the information that will be stored on each book. I created a header file for each file in this program, but I'm going to walk you through more of the implementation briefly. The one thing I do want to show you is that in book is one of two classes that are derived from entity. So if you can see right here, this shows that it's derived from entity. These are our private members, and then these are our public constructors and our functions. There's several. Here is where we have that virtual function that's now being implemented. So that has to be here. And the other two things that are important to notice in this file is we have a copy constructor right here. And so this is where we're passing a reference of another book object into the constructor and creating an exact copy of a book that we already have. This parameter, count is new, is used to keep adequate track of our stock of the objects of books that we have. So in this function, this static function right here, get book count, when I was implementing it, the numbers kept duplicating. And the reason is because when we were passing through these copies, it was always counting it double, even if it was already a book that we had. So because it's a copy of a book, I didn't need to count it as like a whole new book object. I just wanted how many specific books we had. So we had to add this Boolean parameter to make sure that our counts were good. On the implementation of this, this is what it looks like. This is our basic book constructor. So if that Boolean is true, then we're going to increase our book count. And then here, this is our copy constructor. And if it's new, we're going to increase our book count. But if it's not new, then we're going to just leave our book count the way it is. So that was the logic to get this implemented. And then we have our destructor, our basic accessors, and our mutators to set price, set stock. This is our display function that we're overriding. So we're going to print out the title, the author, the price, and how many copies of the book we have in stock. This is initializing our member book count to 0. So we're starting initially with 0. And then this is our static function get book count. So we would not call this on an object. We would just call this on the book class. The second file that is going to inherit from our entity is transaction. And you can see that this inherits from our entity. And for our private members, we have a string called type, we have a pointer to a book, and we have a date object, which I will go over the date file next. But essentially, when we call the transaction, we're calling it on the type, the pointer to a book, and the date. And we're just going to display all of that information in the display function. The date file is relatively simple. All we're doing with the date file is we're adding a day, a month, and a year, and we're setting that as its private member functions. We have a destructor, and then we also have a display function as well that's going to display the day, the month, and the year. And this object is what's being called in our transaction date right here. So once we create a date object, then we can pass that through, and that gets assigned to our transaction. Then the next, and I would say probably the meatiest of the files is our catalog. So this is what is going to actually keep track of our books in our catalog. And I did this by creating a doubly linked list. So in order to do that, the first thing that we did is, actually I'm going to pull up the header file just to make that a little easier to see at first. So created two nodes within this catalog, or two classes within this catalog file. The first one is our node, and this is what we're using for our linked list. So this is going to keep track of all of our book objects. So in our node, we have a pointer to a book, we have a pointer to a node named next, a pointer to a node named previous, and then we're also creating our node by passing a pointer to a book in here. So, and this is our constructor right here. So this is going to be a pointer to the next node, and this is going to be a pointer to the previous node. So in our catalog class, we also have a pointer to our node that we're naming head and a pointer to our node that we're naming tail. We have our constructor and our destructor, and then we have different functions. So there's a way to add a book by passing a pointer. There's a way to search for a book by entering the title. There's a way to display our books, to remove a book, and to decrease the stock, and then also find the book with the lowest price. So the important thing about all of these, well, most of these, the add book, the remove book, actually those are probably the two most, that's going to affect our pointers, because that is going to change where our linked list is pointing to as far as the head and the tail, and then the previous and the next as well. So the implementation for that looks like this. For our constructor, when we're passing in our reference to a book, this is where we are making that Boolean for book false. So when we were making our copy constructor for the node, that's where it was duplicating everything. So this is why we're setting it to false in our node, because the node kept trying to create new objects for that static function that we had in the book file. So we don't want it to create it as a new object per se. It is creating a copy of it, but I just don't want to count it that way. I want to know exactly how many different books we have. So the next pointer is going to be a null pointer, and our previous is null. So we're basically just saying we're starting out our first node, and there's nothing behind it, and there's nothing in front of it. For our catalog class, we're doing the same thing. Our head is going to be a null pointer, and our tail is going to be a null pointer. So now what we're going to do is to add a book. We are doing this from catalog, and we're doing this as an add book function, passing a reference to our, passing a pointer to our book in here. And then we're creating a pointer to a new node. We're copying this book into our node because that's what we have that set up for up here, right there. And if head is false, then we're going to make the head, the tail is the new node. Otherwise, so basically we're just saying that it's the only book in the catalog, the head and the tail are the same, and that is the new node. Otherwise, if the list is not empty, then we're going to set the node to the end of the list and make our next null. And then our new node is previous is going to link to the tail of the new node. So this will update our tail and our head. So that's how we add a book. If you add a book, if there's nothing behind it, then it is, if there's nothing in the list, it becomes the only node in that list. And so it is the head, it is the tail. If it's not an empty list, then we're moving it to the end and we're making that previous tail the new node tail, and then we're setting the previous tail to previous. So we're just updating our nodes accordingly to make sure that everything is pointing forward and backwards the same. I'm not going to go through the search book because it's relatively simple. We're just searching by title and we're returning whether that's available or not. Display books is pretty simple too. Remove books, that's where we want to take careful consideration to our nodes again, because we want to make sure if we are, there's several logics points in here. Essentially, if the title that we're removing is the tail, then we need to make the previous node the new tail. If we're removing the title that happens to be the head, then we need to make the next node the new head and then make the pointers appropriate from there. And if we're taking it from the middle, then we need to take the previous and point it to the next, because we're just removing that middle node. So this logic was a little bit more complicated to make sure that our nodes are still pointing to the appropriate nodes as far as what's next and what's previous. And then that updates our tail and our heads as well, right there. So, okay, decrease stock also is a little bit more complicated because I wanted to ensure that, like, if a book was sold on a transaction, that the stock was updated. So we had to find out what the stock was, make sure it was more than 0 if we were selling this book, and then if it was, decrease it by 1 and then assign that new number to the get stock. So and then the lowest price book is relatively the same. It's going to loop through the nodes of book objects and then compare the prices among the books to find out which one's the lowest. And then it's going to return our lowest price book. So, okay. And that lowest price book is this pointer right here to a book. So it'll return what the name of the book is. That is pretty much the implementation. Like I said, you could do a lot more functions, but this is what we did. The biggest thing was our doubly linked list of nodes of book objects. So that was the meat and bones of this project. I did the main under bookstore. So I will go through this as well. So we included all of our files to make sure that the program would run appropriately. And then I added, well, let's just walk through it. So under main, the first thing we did is we created a catalog. That's step 1. You got to create a catalog before you can start adding things to your catalog. So second, these are just a couple books that we added just to start our catalog off with something. So we have our C++ primer, the author was Lippmann, the price is $45.99, and we have 10 of those books in stock. Our second book is Effective C++ by Scott Myers. It's $39.99, and there are 5 copies of that book. So now we want to add these books into our catalog. So catalog, add book, book 1, catalog, add book, book 2. Excuse me, to show how the copy constructor works, we are making a third book, book 3, of a new book, but now we are putting our pointer in to book 1. So this is going to create a third book of C++ primer, which I'll show you what that looks like, but just to show that our copy constructor works. And then we're adding book 3. So the first thing that it's going to do is display our books, and then this is the user interface. So we have a Boolean set to finished and a while set to not finished. So while finished is true, not true, then it's going to just keep looping through this section of code. So we have 7 choices for our users to use. They can do output, which will display the books, search for a book, process a transaction, add a book, remove a book, find the lowest priced book, the total books created, and exit the program. So then once you hit 7, which I'll jump ahead a little bit, 7 changes are finished to true, and that's how we exit the program and we break it. So then the rest of it is just a simple case and switch. So our choice is going to be from our user input. They'll put that in, it saves as choice, and then choice is our switch. So this will display all of our books by using our function catalog display books. This searches for a title and either displays whether the book is found or the book is not found, and that's just by putting your title in, and then it puts that into found book, catalog, search book. So it's just going to tell you whether it's, if you found it, it'll display it. If it didn't find it, it just says it won't find it. Processing a transaction is basically the sale of a book. So if you remember, under transaction, we needed a date object. So we create a date just for our sample. You could have the user input the date, but that doesn't really make much sense. So the date is just 2/27/2025. And then for our transaction, we're passing through the string sale, if we found the book, so if that book is in here, and then the date. And then it will display the sale. It'll decrease the stock by the transaction title. Adding a new book requires the user to input a title, an author's name, a price, and the quantity of stock that we have. And then it uses that information to create a new book object, a pointer to a new book object called title, author, price, and quantity. And then we're adding that pointer new book into our catalog. Case 4 is removing a book, which we did that. I kind of walked through that, but it's the same thing. You just need the title for that. So if the title is found, then we remove the book. And then lowest price, like I said, it's just going to go through all those nodes, look at our pointers to our book objects, and then compare the prices and then display that. This is that static function we created, book get book count. So that'll show us the total books created. And I'll walk through that a little bit to show how that works. And then we exit the program with case number 7. If it's not any of the first options, 0 through 7 options, then we have an invalid choice. So that's it. Let's look at okay. So when we first run the program, this is what displays our bookstore catalog and then the books that we have. So we have our C++ primer, our effective C++. This is our copy constructor that we did. So it literally just takes a copy of this and puts it in there. So the copy constructor, I think I said it wrong earlier in my video. It is going to create that book as a new object. It's just when we do the nodes that we didn't want it to update the count. So if we look, I'm going to go out of order here for a second. But if we do our total books created, number 6, it should pop up with 3. And it does. So our total books created is 3, and that's because we have 3 here. But let's say we actually really don't want a second entry for C++. We already know we have that in our stock. So now let's go ahead and remove it. And we're going to say remove. It says that it was removed successfully, but let's check that by looking at our output. We should only have one copy of our C++ on here and our effective C++. So we'll do option 0 and good. So we only have 2 of those. So let's go ahead and add a couple of books to make sure that we can add our books appropriately. We're going to name this thing, but it's not worth very much. $13.99. And we only have 3 of them in stock. Let's check our output again. And great, now we have that book in there. So let's add one more book. Let's do option 3 to add a book. Let's say and it'll be $20. And we have 15 of those in stock. So let's check our output. And now we have 4 of these. So let's look at our total books created now and see if that's updated. Perfect. So we have 4 books that were created. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay, so now let's search for a book. Let's say effective book found, the title, the author, the price, and how many we have in stock. Great, so it did find it. Let's just say, let's put in a different book. Book not found. So we don't have anything on Java. That's because this is a C++ class. Let's remove a book. So that's going to be option 4. Let's remove effective C++. Book removed successfully. Let's double check that, do our output. Perfect. We still have 3 books in our catalog. We're not a very diverse bookstore, but we know what we like. So let's check and see what the lowest priced book is. That's option number 5. If we just look at our catalog, we would expect that to be the I Love Coding book, but let's verify it works. I Love Coding, $13.99, 3 of them in stock. That is the cheapest book that we have, so that's great. I think that's the entire program. We've had our display, our search for a book. Oh, maybe we didn't process the transaction. Let's do that. Okay, process transaction. That's kind of important. Okay, so processing a transaction. Enter the title of the book. Let's say my book is the one that he bought. Okay, so the transaction details. It was a sale of the book, I Love Coding, and it happened on February 27th, 2025. The stock updated to 2. So that should be correct. We were at 3, and now that we have sold a book, it's at 2. So let's double check that by our output. And perfect. So that stock updated now that we have sold a book. So I think that's it. We have our books created. We found the lowest price. We added a couple books, took a book away. We processed a transaction. So very simple management system for our bookstore, but very effective. It was really fun to put this all together in a doubly linked list. I really enjoyed that. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I'd love to hear it. This has been a really great class on C++, and I feel like I've learned a lot. We'll finish this out by just exiting our program, make sure we can actually get out of our software, and we're good. So thank you guys for tuning in, and hope you have a good day.